Imagine a company that, over 6 years, released 51 games, and not a single one took off. Money is running out. Staff has been cut from 100 people down to 12. And right there, standing on the edge of bankruptcy, three Finnish students make one last bet. Game number 52. That game was called Angry Birds. It brought the company Rovio more than 3 billion downloads, two Hollywood movies with a third on the way, theme park rides, a Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade balloon, and eventually a sale for $776 million to the Japanese giant Sega. But what happened to the people who built it? Why did the founders leave the company, one after another, right at the peak of its success? What happened to the marketing genius nicknamed the Mighty Eagle, who later tried to build a $15 billion undersea tunnel between two countries? And did any of them actually make as much money from all this as everyone assumes they should have? Today we'll go through the whole story from the very beginning. The failures, the miracle, the movies, the lawsuits, and the eventual sale. Stay until the end. That's where it gets most interesting about what the founders of Rovio are doing right now. In 2026, let's start in 2003. Helsinki University of Technology, Finland. Three students, Nicholas Head, Jarno Veikvainen, and Kim Dykert, take part in a mobile game development competition at the Assembly Festival, sponsored by Nokia and Hewlett-Packard. They create a game called King of the Cabbage World. Yes, a game about a cabbage kingdom, which would later be renamed Mole War. Winning the competition inspires them to found their own company. They name it Relud. In 2005, the company gets its first investor and changes its name to Rovio, which means bonfire or pyre in Finnish. That's why the company's logo is still a flame that never goes out. The next 6 years are a story of survival, not success. Rovio works as a contractor studio. It develops games for other companies, including Electronic Arts, on commission. This is called work for hire. The company doesn't own its own games. It just fulfills someone else's orders for a fixed fee. During this time, the studio releases 51 games. Not one of them becomes a hit. By 2009, the company has only 12 employees left. The rest had to be laid off. There's just enough money left for one last attempt. That's when one employee, Peter Vesterbacka, who was in charge of marketing and business development, insists, enough working for others. It's time to create their own brand, their own intellectual property. That decision would turn out to be pivotal, and we'll come back to Peter Vesterbacka later, because his own story after Rovio is one of the wildest parts of this whole saga. Development of what would become game number 52 begins in March 2009. The team has 10 people. By the final stretch, only 4 or 5 remain. Designer Jaakko Aisalo pitches several concepts. One of them, a flock of round birds with furrowed eyebrows, looking angry for some reason. They have no legs, they can't fly, and somehow that's exactly what hooks the team. We spent a long time thinking about why they were so angry, Michael Head, who would soon take over as CEO, later recalled. The answer came quickly. Someone had stolen their eggs. Who? Green pigs. And that's how the game's concept was born. Slingshot, birds, egg-stealing pigs. The budget allocated for development was 25,000 euros, pocket change by industry standards. The mechanics were built on physics, inspired by the popular Flash game at the time, Crush the Castle. The team worked on the project as a side effort alongside other commissioned work. There's one detail that has become legendary in the gaming industry. The mother of one of the founders got so hooked on a test version of the game that she burned the Christmas turkey in the oven while playing instead of watching it. It was the first sign that the team had created something genuinely addictive. In December 2009, Angry Birds launches on iPhone. And the first few weeks are not a triumph. They're almost a flop. In the biggest markets, the US and the UK, the game generates zero interest. Instead of giving up, Rovio decides to focus on smaller countries: Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Greece. Slowly, downloads accumulate to 40,000, just enough to keep the company alive for a few more months. And then a miracle happens. On February 11th, 2010, Apple names Angry Birds its Game of the Week on the UK App Store. Over the next 3 days, the game climbs from position 600 to number 1. By April, it's number 1 on the US App Store too. Then comes the frenzy. Rovio starts making serious money from downloads and Android advertising, up to £600,000 a month. In 2011, the company raises $42 million in funding from Excel partners, Atomico, and a fund tied to Skype founder Niklas Zennström. That same year, Zynga, the creators of Farmville, offers to buy Rovio for $2.2 billion. Rovio turns it down. Niklas Head, one of the 3 founders, had been leading development up to that point. But in 2009, the board of directors appoints not him, but his brother, Michael Head, as CEO. Michael Head becomes the face of the company for the next 5 years and the main driving force behind turning Angry Birds from a game into a full media franchise. Rovio officially changes its name to Rovio Entertainment in 2011, and it's more than just a rebrand. The company acquires the animation studio Combo, plans a feature film, and launches a line of toys and merchandise. Peter Vesterbacka, the marketing chief, takes on an internal nickname that becomes part of company legend, the Mighty Eagle, after one of the most powerful characters in the game. In 2011, Time magazine names him one of the 100 most influential people in the world. By 2013, half of the company's annual revenue, $216 million, comes not from game downloads, but from licensing and merchandise, plush toys, theme park rides, books. Angry Birds becomes one of the biggest gaming brands in history, with over 3 billion downloads at its peak. The IT might look like a flawless success story. But this is exactly where things get more interesting. What happened to the people who actually built it? Before we get to the departures, there's a chapter that's easy to forget. Rovio didn't just make a game into a toy line. It made it into a Hollywood franchise, and a surprisingly profitable one. In May 2016, the Angry Birds movie opens in theaters. Produced by Rovio Animation and distributed by Sony's Columbia Pictures. It's the first major feature film ever based on a mobile app, something critics openly doubted could work, since the original game barely had a story at all. The cast includes Jason Sudeikis, Josh Gad, Danny McBride, Maya Rudolph, and Peter Dinklage. The film opens at number 1 at the North American box office and finishes its run with roughly $352 million worldwide against a $73 million production budget. According to Deadline Hollywood's industry accounting, that translates into about $72 million in net profit for the studios involved. Reviews were mixed. Rotten Tomatoes gave it a rough 44%. But financially, it worked exactly as intended. A sequel follows in 2019. The Angry Birds Movie 2, timed to coincide with the 10th anniversary of the original game's release, bringing in an expanded voice cast that includes Nicki Minaj, Awkwafina, and Leslie Jones. And Rovio doesn't stop there. A third film, The Angry Birds Movie 3, is currently in production, with a 2026 release planned. alongside a 10th anniversary theatrical re-release of the very first movie scheduled for this November. This matters for our story because it explains why Rovio, even during its most turbulent leadership shakeups, kept investing heavily in content far beyond mobile gaming, animation studios, movie financing, licensing deals. It's also part of why the eventual conversations with buyers valued Rovio not just as a game studio, but as a full entertainment brand with its own Hollywood track record. This is where Rovio's story diverges from the classic success story. In most cases, founders stay in power for years after a big win. Here, it's the opposite. Michael Head, the CEO who turned a game into an empire, announces in August 2014 that he will step down from his position in January 2015. The official reason: the company wants to diversify its business and needs a new management approach. Pekka Rantola takes over. By the end of 2014, it becomes clear why that decision was timely. The company's profit drops by 73%, down to 10 million euros. The cause: poor sales of licensed merchandise. In August 2015, Rovio lays off 260 employees worldwide. Michael Head doesn't disappear from the industry, though. He remains chairman of Rovio's board and heads the company's animation division, Rovio Animation. And in 2017, he goes a step further. He buys out that animation division through his own company, Kaiken Entertainment, and continues working in games and animation outside Rovio's structure. Meanwhile, the CEO's seat keeps changing hands. In December 2015, Rantola also steps down, replaced by Katie Leveranda, the company's former chief legal officer. That's the third CEO in 6 years since Angry Birds launched. Around the same time, Peter Vesterbacka, the man behind the Mighty Eagle nickname and one of the loudest public voices of the entire Angry Birds phenomenon, also exits the company in 2016. And what he does next might be the strangest second act in this entire story, which we'll get into shortly. So what happened to the three people who actually founded the company back in 2003? Nicholas Head, Jarno Veikvainen, and Kim Dykert. There's far less public information about them than about Michael Head or Peter Vesterbacka, and that's no coincidence. Like in many startups, the technical co-founders at Rovio gradually stepped back from day-to-day operations, staying on as advisors or board members, while the public face of the brand was shaped by Michael Head, Peter Vesterbacka, and the professional managers hired later. This is a typical trajectory for tech startups. The people who know how to build a product aren't always the same people who know how to scale a company into a global media brand with licensing deals, movies, and an IPO. At some point, professional managers take over the board, while the founders either move on to new projects or stay in the background as investors. Character designer Jaco Isalo, the man who literally drew those Angry Birds, stayed with the company much longer, continuing to work on the franchise's creative side long after the first generation of leadership had moved on. Now, the detour we promised. Of everyone connected to Angry Birds, Peter Vesterbacka has had, by far, the most unusual career after leaving the company in 2016. Even while he was still Rovio's chief marketing officer, Vesterbacka was already building a second identity for himself in Finland's startup world. Back in 2008, alongside other organizers, he had co-founded Slush, now one of the largest startup and technology conferences in Europe, drawing tens of thousands of attendees, thousands of startups, and over 1,000 investors from more than 100 countries every year in Helsinki. He also co-founded Mobile Monday, a global mobile industry community plus initiatives like Startup Sauna and Some Bazaar. After leaving Rovio, Vesterbacka decided that a mobile game, even one downloaded 3 billion times, wasn't a big enough project anymore. His own explanation: education is the second largest market on the planet after food, worth trillions of dollars, and he wanted to do something on that scale. But his most talked about post-Rovio venture wasn't a school, it was a tunnel. Vesterbacka became the public face of the Finest Bay Area project, a proposed undersea railway tunnel connecting Helsinki, Finland, with Tallinn, Estonia, across the Gulf of Finland. The estimated price tag, around $15 billion. It's one of the most ambitious infrastructure proposals in Northern Europe. And, as of this recording, it remains a proposal rather than a finished tunnel. He also moved into education technology, launching a program marketed as bringing Finnish-style education abroad. That venture drew controversy. Reporting by Finland's national broadcaster Yle and other outlets covered accusations from Chinese families that the program didn't deliver on what was promised regarding language courses and immersion experiences. More recently, in partnership with longtime tech executive Kusta Valtonen, Vesterbacka co-founded Finest Love VC, a venture capital fund based in Estonia and Finland, which has made investments in areas like children's educational technology. He also holds an adjunct professorship in innovation and entrepreneurship at Tongji University in China, and continues to appear at international tech and health innovation events in 2026. So while the three technical founders of Rovio mostly disappeared from the public eye after cashing out, the company's most visible personality took the opposite path, trading a Slingshot and Birds mobile game for undersea tunnels, venture capital, and Chinese university lecture halls. Back at Rovio itself, the company goes through several more waves of turbulence after the leadership changes. In 2017, Rovio holds its IPO, going public on Nasdaq Helsinki. That's the moment the company becomes publicly traded. Anyone can buy its shares, and its financials become public information. In 2018, the company's adjusted quarterly operating profit drops from 16 million euros to 6 million euros, more than a 50% decline. At the same time, the company tries to diversify. It opens a new studio in London to develop multiplayer online games and acquires several smaller studios, PlayRaven, Darkfire Games, and later Ruby Games in Turkey. In 2020 and 2021, Alexander Pelletier-Normand takes over as CEO, a position he still holds today, even after the company's transition under Sega. Then in 2021, the U.S. state of New Mexico files a lawsuit against Rovio over children's privacy violations. According to the lawsuit, the game collected data on underage users without proper consent. This continues a story that dates back to 2014, when allegations first surfaced that Angry Birds was leaking user data to third-party companies, possibly even to intelligence agencies like the NSA. At the time, hackers unhappy about this even defaced Rovio's website in protest. And finally, the last act. In March 2023, Israeli company Playtika enters talks to buy Rovio for $800 million. The talks collapse, but by April 2023, Japanese giant Sega announces it will buy Rovio for 706 million euros. That's $776 million. The deal closes in August 2023, and Rovio officially becomes a subsidiary of Sega Europe, a company that, just 20 years earlier, was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy with a €25,000 budget, gets sold for nearly $800 million. That here's the key question. Did the founders themselves actually get rich? The exact personal net worth of Rovio's founders has never been fully disclosed publicly. That's private information neither the company nor the founders are obligated to reveal. But the structure of the deals allows for some reasonable conclusions. Michael Head, despite stepping down as CEO in 2015, remained one of the company's largest shareholders right up until the sale to Sega in 2023, meaning he received his share of that deal. His current venture, Kaiken Entertainment, continues to work in game development and animation. So he didn't leave the industry. He simply changed the format of his involvement, from running a massive public company to owning a much smaller, fully private studio. Peter Vesterbacka, as we just covered, took his share of Rovio's success and reinvested it into an entirely different set of ventures. Infrastructure, education, venture capital, with mixed results and no small amount of controversy. Along the way, unlike almost everyone else in this story, he's remained one of the most publicly visible people connected to Angry Birds, appearing at conferences well into 2026. The technical co-founders, Nicholas Head, Jarno Vakvainen, and Kim Dykert, as holders of the company's original share pool, also received their portion of the proceeds following the 2017 IPO and the 2023 Sega sale. But unlike Michael Head or Vesterbacka, they appear far less often in public, in interviews or at industry conferences. That's typical for technical founders who, once a company has scaled, tend to stay out of the spotlight, focusing on new private ventures or investments instead of public visibility. As for the Angry Birds brand itself, under Sega's wing, it's still very much alive today. In 2024, there was a crossover with Sonic the Hedgehog. In 2026, Rovio, now part of Sega, continues releasing updates for Angry Birds 2, running environmental initiatives like the Green Game Jam, and preparing both a 10th anniversary re-release of the first movie and the release of the Angry Birds Movie 3. The company's offices are still operating in Espoo, Finland, as well as in Barcelona, Toronto, Stockholm, and Copenhagen. One final interesting detail: the original 2009 game, the very one that started it all, was pulled from sale in 2019. It returned in 2022 under the name Rovio Classics, Angry Birds, but within a year was renamed Red's First Flight on iOS and removed entirely from Android. The company decided the old free version was drawing attention away from its newer, microtransaction-based games. The game that saved the company from bankruptcy, in a way, ended up a casualty of its own success. That Rovio's story isn't a tale about three students who came up with some birds and got rich forever. It's a story about how 51 failures preceded a single success, about a marketing exec who turned into a tunnel-building venture capitalist, about a CEO who cashed out to run his own animation studio, and about how, even after overwhelming success, a company and the people inside it keep changing, facing crises, layoffs, lawsuits, and eventually end up under the wing of an entirely different giant. The founders of Rovio didn't vanish. They simply stopped being the center of attention. Much like their own original game stopped being the center of attention once newer sequels and newer movies took over. That if you're curious about more stories on what happened to the companies and people who created the iconic products of our childhood, like and subscribe. We'll break down another story just like this one next time.